There's a lot more talk going around about Antarctica and all this stuff as John Levy put out a video showing all these structures in Antarctica and these different ruins that looked very interesting. And they had statues, they had everything. At first, I was like, huh, what? That's amazing. That is what we've been looking for, stuff like that. And then I was like, I gotta dive into this. And I kept looking at the Wayback Machine. I kept trying to find anything in the archives that resembled anything like this. And I couldn't find anything anywhere. And it is very easy for them to delete stuff and maybe someone to have it survive. But it's also very easy for someone to type that kind of prompt into AI-driven art generation machines and produce this kind of thing as well with AI patterns and mathematics and tech. So, what is the accurate thing here? Because on Reddit someone called this out and it commented, you'll see in a second, the original author that Levy credited was also kind of seemingly knowing that this was a technology and that he may be a part of the industry, as using it, claiming as an industry secret. So, is the Hollywood industry, the NASA people expand into different things like this to help us kind of lead us in different directions or anything? But again, I think the way things are going now, things get kind of disproven. And I don't blame John Levy, because if I came across this, I probably would have been like, wow, look at this. I wouldn't have really thought much about the AI until some of the pictures he showed with the statues and the faces of the people in that video. That was clearly AI. I thought that right away. But these other things are, again, very convincing, very interesting. And so as a result, I went down the Antarctica rabbit hole, and I wanted to just make a collection of did you know about Antarctica's different interesting facts that I found that were published in the year 1999. Did you know the cold hard facts? It was a column that appeared in the Antarctic Sun, published during the austral summer for the United States Antarctic Program at McMurdo Station in Antarctica. So this is one of their publications, and they just had some interesting information about here, some that I knew, some that I did not know, and a lot of different avenues of research to dive down. Like, for instance, one of them is that in Germany before World War II, Germany apparently had 16,000 photographs of the North Pole. And maybe the South Pole, Antarctica as well. And then all those were never seen again. So there's a lot more interesting things to go down and check out in rabbit holes, but this is just a fun little did you know, the cold hard facts about Antarctica. I'm just reading it, and I'll probably chime in as well, but very interesting. Dive down some holes. If you have any other insight, let me know. I also have always heard, that the icebergs are fresh water. That's a very interesting fact. And I've also heard in another book that the auroras could potentially be seeds and pollen, different kinds of mushroom spores and of all different colors in the upper atmosphere from either the hollow earth or a distant paradise. And I've always really liked that idea, and because you can find different seeds, the birds, all different kinds of things, the way plants travel, everything like that. There is so much mystery, and so take this as you will and enjoy some of the pictures also from that site found in the Wayback Machine. So here we go. Did you know Captain John Davis aboard the Huron out of New Haven, Connecticut may have made the first landing on Antarctica at Hughes Bay on the Antarctic Peninsula on February 7th, 1821 on a sealing trip. The next known landing on the continent was at Cape Adare in Victorialand on January 18th, 1895, 74 years later. And that's not including any of the previous explorers from the prehistory of things where people were everywhere in boats, and this area could have been warm. So this is all kind of after, in like the research era of stuff, not the unknown theorized era that we love so much. Jules Dumont d'Urville, in addition to exploring the coast of Antarctica, discovered the statue Venus de Milo and brought it to France. Interesting. The South Magnetic Pole was east of Ross Island in 1600. It has moved roughly northwest at the rate of 6 to 9 miles per year and is now in the Dumont d'Urville Sea. I don't believe any of that nonsense. There's something interesting about that pole, and they got to prove it to me for me to really see something and believe it. The first people to winter on the ice were in a British-funded team under the leadership of Karsten Egeberg Bogrevink, a Norwegian. The 10 men, 3 British, 5 Norwegian, and 2 Finns, lived in 2 huts called Camp Ridley at the base of Cape Adare from March 1899 to January 1900. On March 12, 1842, the Erebus and the Terror, James Clark Ross's ships, collided in a storm in a field of icebergs, crippling the Erebus. 3 days later, both ships were repaired enough to continue the voyage. Robert Falcon Scott's first voyage to the Antarctic in 1901 and 1904 began poorly. The expedition ship Discovery was found to be leaking on the voyage from Britain to New Zealand, and that Robert Falcon Scott is the one that supposedly found those images that were repurposed. And the pictures that I found from that expedition showed nothing of ancient structures. I couldn't find anything relating to that, so it lends more towards the AI reality. The first newspaper on Antarctica was the South Polar Times, published by Scott's expedition each month. Ernest Shackleton was the editor and printer. Submissions were solicited from all members of the group. Very interesting that they'd have time to print that in the South Polar Times. What is happening down there? I have a feeling there's a nice vacation land for the rich. The South Polar skua is found farther south than any other bird in the world. Some have been observed by explorers on the ice sheet and even at the geographic South Pole. The skua has a strong homing instinct. 5 nesting birds were tagged, flown to the South Pole, and released. 10 days later, one of these birds had returned to its nest after an 800-mile flight over barren, featureless terrain, quote-unquote. McMurdo has a winter garden. Salads were served every lunch and dinner from March through September from this oasis. The winter population of 155 people missed only 5 days of homegrown freshies. A crop of 680 pounds of lettuce, 70 pounds of tomatoes, 50 pounds of cucumbers, 62 pounds of peppers, and 25 pounds of herbs were grown without soil. A nutrient-rich solution produced a constant harvest in our hydroponic greenhouse. Cool. Antarctic maps were drawn 3 centuries before its discovery in 1818. Piri Reis's map, painted on a gazelle skin in 1531, was rediscovered in the old Imperial Palace's library in Constantinople in 1929. Reis, in his own writing on the chart, noted he was not the originator of the map, but he copied from ancient sources. The Orontius Finicus map of 1531 was included in Mercator's Atlas of 1569. In 1737, Philip Buach published a map showing dimensions beneath the ice, not verified until 1958. Interesting. When a comprehensive seismic survey was completed during the International Geophysical Year. Paul Seipel first came to Antarctica as a Boy Scout. Winner of a nationwide scouting contest, he was 19 years old during Bird's 1928 expedition. His skills with dog handling persuaded Bird to allow him to join the winter team. Trained in taxidermy, Seipel skinned seals on the mess table, providing meat to the cook for dinner, and sent the pelts to the American Museum of Natural History. Losing his first flock, he kept 14 emperors and 6 Adels alive for American zoos on an experimental diet of seal meat and blubber. Interesting. Nathaniel B. Palmer, a young sealing captain, discovered Antarctica 177 years ago, November in 1820. A few weeks later, he was scouting seal rookeries when he encountered the 2-ship Russian expedition sent by Alexander I for the specific purpose of discovering the southern continent. Although disappointed, the captain of the Vostok, Fabian G. von Bellingshausen, congratulated Palmer and named the peninsula Palmerland. Hitler and Goering sent Dormier flying boats to Antarctica to claim the continent for Germany. Marker poles with swastikas were thrown out onto the ice to demonstrate land claims of the Third Reich. Who knows what that progressed into? The C-5 Galaxy aircraft can carry 4 helos or 8 Greyhound buses as a cargo. Mount Erebus is the tallest point of Ross Island. It is also the only active volcano in Antarctica. Does it lead to the underworld? Who will know? Entombed under Antarctica's ice are mountains, 100-mile-long lakes, and deep troughs, and possibly cities. I'll add that part, and so much more, I'm sure. God, there's got to be something. And a lot of life, too, I bet. The Ross Ice Shelf is equal in area to France. In the dry valleys, tiny ponds of water exhibit microscopic life in the summer. Miniature wingless insects hide in patches of moss and lichens. A beard-cutting machine was part of Amundsen's gear. This was useful to prevent ice from accumulating on beards from frozen breath. A tooth extractor was also taken and had to be used during the course of the journey. The penguin is the most highly specialized of all birds for marine life. With wings that resemble flippers, a penguin can swim as fast as 25 miles per hour in pursuit of fish, squid, and shrimp. When on land, it fasts. Interesting. Mount Erebus was named for the flagship of Captain James Ross in 1841. It is a fitting name for a volcano that reaches perhaps 100 kilometers into the earth. Interesting. In the Greek myth, Erebus is the personification of primeval darkness, born together with Nyx, night, from the primordial chaos. Erebus was the dark region beneath the earth through which the shades passed to the realms of Hades below. And I'll add this, that kind of sounds like Tartarus as well. Erebus, Tartarus, very similar. Is that a kind of a hint that they're throwing at us, maybe? That they, in 1841, when they named it that, had quite a knowledge of Tartarus, ancient civilizations, and were maybe looking for it, and who knows, have heard stories that got lost, etc. Blah, 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 blah. Antarctica has more ice and snow than all the glaciers and snowfields of the rest of the world combined. So they say. Frank Wild participated in 5 heroic age journeys. He was with Scott on the Discovery, with Shackleton on the Nimrod, Endurance and Quest, and with Mawson's 1991-14 expedition. Born in 1874 in Yorkshire, he died of pneumonia in 1930 in South Africa, where he was an unsuccessful cotton farmer. Interesting. Captain Cook's boyhood home is bihemispherical. The great navigator was born in Marton, Yorkshire. His farmhouse cottage was dismantled in 1934 and shipped to Australia, where it was re-erected in Melbourne's Fitzroy Gardens. Alaskan Huskies were brought to McMurdo in 1956 and 57 with sleds and drivers. The dogs were used in case of an aircraft crash in remote areas inaccessible to air rescue. Fed on raw seal meat, the smell of dogs permeated the clothes of their trainers. The odor was so strong that the men had to be isolated from the rest of the camp, living, eating, and sleeping with their dogs. The Beardmore Glacier is over 5 miles wide at its mouth. If glaciers are frozen rivers, then the Beardmore is the widest river in the world. That is very interesting to know, because we know how civilization in life goes around rivers. And I really wonder, when I see things like this in Greenland that are just covered with snow almost unnaturally, I wonder, if they had the ability to create snow and just blast snow for so long and just make it happen. If you could just do tons of water vapor and just cover everything. It's easier than doing with sand, and it's a similar method than what they probably did in the Sahara or in all other places. If you can't blow it up, cover it for a long time. Who knows, though? Let's see, Alaska, the Beardmore Glacier. Okay, the surgeon on Ross's Erebus and Terror voyages, Robert McCormick, also served on the Beagle. That small surveying brig carried fellow naturalist Charles Darwin on the research journey that led to the origin of species. The first black man to sail to Antarctica was Peter Harvey, working on the Nathaniel B. Palmer's Hero. He was one of the 5 crewmen on the historic voyage of discovery in 1820 to 21. I wonder what they saw there. George Bernard Shaw named the classic of Antarctica adventure stories The Worst Journey in the World. Has been continuously in print since 1922. Apsley G.B. Cherry Garrard was assistant zoologist on Scott's last expedition. He accompanied Bowers and Wilson to Cape Crozier to receive emperor penguin eggs. G.B. Shaw was a friend living in a nearby village. Cheery reported he asked Shaw, "What shall I call this book?" It was The Worst Journey in the World, but I can't come up with a title. Shaw exclaimed, "That's it." There we go. I wonder if that's also another way to hide it, because it does do a good job of being like, I don't want to go there. Too cold. Nope, that gets a high percentage of people not ever wanting to even consider going there. A Scott sledge was used to haul food in a blizzard in New Zealand in 1939. The sledge was used originally on an expedition to the South Pole and was on exhibit for 26 years in a museum in Dunedin. It was used to carry food to a radio station isolated by the worst snowstorm in the city's history. The rescuers got within a quarter mile of the station and were met by the station staff on a hill overlooking Dunedin. Cows came to Antarctica with Byrd in 1933. Admiral Byrd took 3 Guernseys aboard the Jacob Rupert supply ship to provide fresh milk for the expedition. They required sand and straw for bedding and a 2-year supply of hay, pulp, grain, and bran. At Little America, there was a cow barn complete with an electric milking machine. One cow contacted frostbite aboard ship on the return voyage and had to be destroyed. The cattle returned after 22,000 miles of sea travel with a new bull calf christened Iceberg, born just outside of the Antarctic Circle. Shackleton trained for Antarctic expeditions in Norway. Camping at Lake Finns in 1914, the explorer tested his air-propelled sledge, motor crawler, and round tents on the nearby glacier. Nathaniel B. Palmer became a trader in China. After discovering Antarctica, the young whaling captain went on to become a merchant, designer, and owner of some of the greatest clipper ships involved in the China trade. Scott's wife sculpted statues of the explorer. One is in Christchurch, New Zealand, and the other is in England at Waterloo Place. She also produced a landmark bronze statue of E.A. Wilson, the artist and zoologist who died with Scott at the Great Ice Barrier in 1912. Wilson's monument stands in the promenade in Cheltenham, his birthplace. Kennels built by Scott for his sled dogs can still be visited in Lyttelton, New Zealand. Quail Island, near the head of Lyttelton Tower, was used as a quarantine station for dogs and ponies by both Scott Shackleton prior to departure to Antarctica. A fox terrier traveled to both the Arctic and the Antarctic. A biography was written about Igloo, the canine companion of Richard Byrd. His tombstone in the Pine Ridge Cemetery for Small Animals in Dedham, a suburb of Boston, bears the inscription, "Igloo, he was more than a friend." That's interesting. I gotta read that. That's right near me. The Terra Nova, said to be the last whaler built in Dundee, Scotland, 1884, was leased in 1903 to sail with the Morning to McMurdo Sound to relieve Scott's discovery expedition. Returning to sealing with Bowring Brothers, she was resold in November 1909 for Scott's second journey. In 1914, Bowring Brothers bought her again for work in Newfoundland and Labrador waters. Springing a leak 38 miles off Hollander Coast, Greenland, she sank without loss of life on September 12, 1943. So yeah, something would have been mentioned about that Scott mission in discovering ancient monuments and stuff. That it just would... I wish it was true. 51 U.S. aircraft have been lost in Antarctica since 1946. Interesting. The average annual precipitation in the interior of Antarctica is less than 2 inches, drier than the Sahara's desert. Nunataks are mountains that are buried so deeply in snow that only their tips peek above the ice. Otherwise pyramids, maybe? No rain has fallen in the dry valleys in approximately 1 million years, and the occasional traces of snow are quickly blown away. Interesting. The dry valleys. I'd like to look into that. Scott and his companions lugged 37 pounds of geologic samples all the way to their deaths. Apsley Cherry Garrard, a member of Scott's expedition in the worst journey in the world, which it wouldn't have been if they had discovered ancient structures, and I quote, "And I tell you, if you have the desire for knowledge and the power to give it physical expression, go out and explore. You will sledge nearly alone, but those with whom you sledge will not be shopkeepers. That is worth a good deal. If you march your winter journeys, you will have your reward, so long as you want is a penguin's egg." My God. Herbert Pointing, Scott's photographer, pulled a one-man sledge with 400 pounds of photographic and camping equipment. Yikes. He must have gotten a lot then. A lot more than we've seen, so maybe... The first stamps produced specifically for use in the Antarctic were issued by the New Zealand Post Office on January 15, 1908. The King Edward VII land stamp was issued on mail for the first time by members of the Shackleton expedition. Since then, there have been a number of stamps issued specifically for use in the Antarctic. There have also been a large number of other stamps issued which show Antarctic designs, but which themselves are not exclusively for use from the Antarctic. That's interesting. Are they hiding a civilization up there? It seems like they have a structure formed. Captain James Cook and the crews of the Resolution and Adventure became the first men to cross the Antarctic Circle, kind of. They eventually circumnavigated Antarctica, crossing the Antarctic Circle 3 times, so they say. A nuclear power plant was installed by the United States Navy at McMurdo in 1962. It was decommissioned in 1972. That's kind of crazy. In 1911, Scott ran a telephone line 15 miles to connect his hut at Cape Evans with a hut at Hut Point. The name Antarctica is derived from the Greek word Antarktikos, meaning opposite the bear. Arctos, the Great Bear or Big Dipper, is the constellation above the North Pole. The ancient Greeks felt that the Earth was a sphere and that it was logical that a southern landmass would be present to balance the known northern world. Early map makers named the assumed continent Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. Ernest Shackleton was only 48 when he died of an apparent heart attack on board the Quest in 1922. He was buried on South Georgia, ending the heroic era of Antarctic exploration. Yeah, that went underground right after that. And I wonder why they got rid of him. Maybe he found something. In 1935, let me go check this. In 1935, Caroline Mikkelsen, the wife of a Norwegian whaling captain, became the first female to visit Antarctica when she stepped ashore at Vestfold Hills. The first woman to enter to winter on the continent were Edith Roney and Jenny Darlington, who in 1947 and 48 accompanied their husbands to Stonington Island on the Antarctic Peninsula on a private American expedition. Sir Douglas Mawson claimed 42% of Antarctica for Australia following his arduous journeys on the continent. The physicist on Shackleton's British Antarctic expedition of 1907 to 1909, Mawson organized his Australian Antarctic expedition in 1911 to 1914. His British and Australian and New Zealand Antarctic research expedition explored and uncharted more than 4,000 miles of polar coastline. Mawson spent a hellish season at Cape Denison, the windiest place on Earth, where the average summer temperature is negative 30 degrees. He overcame starvation, food poisoning, blizzards, and falls into crevasses in his determined scientific exploration, and died at age 76, covered in honors. Interesting. And could they be saying how, this unbearable cold, but it's actually something different? There's another sun down there, there's another area of warmth, of clear, of nothing. So people think that they're so harsh and no one would ever want to go there. Francis Drake was the first European to enter the southern oceans after being driven south of Tierra del Fuego in 1578 by storms. Although he did not view Antarctica on this voyage, it proved that South America was not connected to the Terra Australis Incognita, the unknown southern land. Ives Joseph de Kerguelen reported the bleak sub-Antarctic islands named for him to be inhabited and cultivated. The King of France dispatched him to establish a colony, and when he was unable to do so, he was court-martialed, dismissed from the Navy, and imprisoned. That's interesting. You have to look into that. 1997 was the 100th anniversary of modern man wintering in Antarctica. 100 years ago, Count Adrien de Gerlach of Belgium sailed into the Bellinghausen Sea with an eclectic crew that included the Norwegian Roald Amundsen, his first taste of Antarctica, and Dr. Frederick Cook. The ship Belgica was frozen into the ice, and the crew spent the winter breaking free of the ice in late summer. Dr. Cook's account of the voyage and the scientific observations taken inspired Scott and Shackleton. The shape of an iceberg is usually an indication of its age. A large Antarctic iceberg may weigh 400 million tons and rise 10 stories above the surface of the water. A burr of this size would contain enough fresh water to supply a city of 3 million people for a year. In 1987, an iceberg broke from the Ross Ice Shelf that was 86 by 22 nautical miles, approximately the size of the state of Delaware. That's a lot of fresh water that people could use since our water is trash. The largest glacier in the world is the Lambert Glacier in the vicinity of Prince Charles Mountain, measuring approximately 25 miles wide and 250 miles long. When Antarctica freezes in the winter, the ice cover doubles the area of the continent, extending it to approximately 30 million square miles. Even in summer, almost the entire continent is covered by ice with an average thickness of almost a mile. I wonder if that's exaggerated or not. There is about 8 times more ice in the Antarctic than in the Arctic region. Antarctica's year-round snow cover reflects nearly 80% of the incoming radiation into the atmosphere. Heat is simply not retained in Antarctica to the degree it is in the Arctic. Scott, that might have something to do with the true shape of the Earth. Might be something there. Wider, bigger, much bigger. Scott's old ship, the Discovery, made 13 successive summer cruises in the Southern Ocean to investigate the biology and oceanography of the region. No land vertebrate can survive Antarctica's harsh conditions. The continent's largest permanent inhabitant is a half-inch long midge and tiny 2-winged fly. Yet the human was able to live an entire season in negative 30 degrees Celsius. See, I find that also pretty tough. Even with some pretty decent technology, that seems like machines would seize. A lot would be really tough. Who knows? What are they trying to hide with the lack of information and the stories that come out? Russia's Mirny Observatory on the West Antarctic ice shelf is provided with 1 ton of clear fresh water per day. 3 tubular electroheaters are inserted into a hole in the ice, and water accumulates in the hole. The ice melts and does not freeze up again, even though the outdoor temperature often reaches minus 30 degrees Celsius. 800 gallons of rum and 45 sheep were packed on the Discovery in 1902. They were part of the provisions for 48 men for 3 years, which included 42,000 pounds of flour, 10,000 pounds of sugar, 3,000 pounds of roast beef, and 23 sledge dogs, not part of the menu. Palmer Station was built on the foundation of a British station built in the 1940s. England built a string of outposts in Antarctica to monitor possible enemy ships or submarines. I wonder why and who. Many sites were maintained into the 1950s, and Port Lockrow, upon which the station was built, was last to be abandoned in 1962. Light was provided at Scott's Hut at Cape Evans in winter's long night. About 7 kilograms of carbide kept 12 lights going throughout the season. In 1873, a German whaler, Edward Dahlmann, took command of the steamer Gronland, setting out for the Antarctic Peninsula. In search of whales, Dahlmann led the first German voyage to the Antarctic, during which a wealth of geographic discoveries were made. In 1873, I wonder what those were, where the art is, or pictures. Farm tractors were the first wheeled vehicles at the South Pole. Sir Edmund Hillary equipped Massey Ferguson tractors for polar travel and arrived at the pole in 1957 with only 20 gallons of fuel left. His men were the first since Scots to reach the South Pole over land. Females did not arrive at the South Pole until 1973, when Donna Muchmore and E. Nan Scott became the first women to undertake scientific work on the world's most isolated continent. The first woman to spend a winter at South Pole was the station physician, Dr. Michelle Eileen Rainey, in 1979. Shackleton brought an automobile to Antarctica in 1907. It was an English Arrol Johnson motor car. Walls of supply cases once formed the garage for the car at Cape Royds. Tins of fuel and lubricants for the vehicle, which have been emptied of the Heritage Trust to avoid future pollution problems at the site. The Bureau of Indian Affairs built one of the ships for Admiral Byrd's third expedition to Antarctica. The North Star, a 1,434-ton wooden ice ship, was used to haul supplies each summer to Alaska. Because of the opposite seasons in Antarctica, the Department of the Interior was able to lend the ship to the Antarctic Service without interrupting the Alaskan service. Most of Byrd's crew of 125 men for his third expedition were from the ranks of the military, scientific institutions, and civilian agencies of the government. The Department of the Interior employed a few volunteers at $10 a month, food and clothing included. The Emperor Penguin rookery at Cape Crozier was discovered in October 1902 by R.S. Skelton, a member of Scott's 1901 to 1904 Discovery Expedition. A month later, C.W.R. Royds, another Discovery member, visited the rookery to collect specimens. By then, the young Emperor penguins had already left the rookery, and Royds recovered only one frozen egg. The weirdest bird nesting expedition that has ever been made was undertaken in 1911 to collect penguin eggs from Cape Crozier. Edward A. Wilson, the geologist, medical officer, and artist on Scott's 2 Antarctic expeditions, believed the penguin to be the most primitive bird in existence. He hoped to gather eggs to trace the ancestry of the species. The excursion to the Cape was undertaken in total darkness, except for the occasional glow of the moon and aurora. Edward Wilson spent his birthday on July 23, 1902, in our bags without a meal or a roof, gradually getting drifted up with snow under the weather wall, wishing the wind would drop, in quotes. Instead, winds tore away the canvas roof till scraps. Green cloth the size of a pocket handkerchief were scattered across the terrain. That doesn't sound like fun. In 1965, a private plane carrying 30 passengers and crew flew from Honolulu across the North Pole to London and Lisbon, then to Buenos Aires and across the South Pole to Christchurch, returning to Honolulu. Leased from the Flying Tigers, the Boeing 707 was sponsored by Rockwell Standard Corporation of Pittsburgh as a scientific exploration with emphasis on high-altitude meteorology and cosmic radiation. I wonder what else they discovered. The first around-the-world solo flight across both poles was accomplished in November of 1971. Flying a twin-engine Piper Navajo aircraft, Elgin Long crossed the South Pole from Punta Arenas and landed at McMurdo en route to Sydney, Australia. Okay. Before World War II, Germany was in possession of 11,600 aerial negatives of Antarctica vistas. Their fate is uncertain, but it is believed they were destroyed in the ashes of the Third Reich. 11,600 aerial negatives. I think I said 16,000 earlier, but wow. I wonder what those were. During WW2, most northern nations were too busy with the war to send expeditions to Antarctica. Reconnaissance was largely limited to German raiders and submarine supply ships in the Allied forces which hunted them. The British secretly established Operation Tabarin at several research bases on and near the peninsula. After the war, Tabarin was renamed the Falkland Island Dependencies Survey, and its mission was changed to exploration. Wonder what else they've explored. Hot and humid Florida holds the geological materials collected in polar regions. The Antarctic Marine Geology Research Facility and Core Library is located at Florida State University. Interesting, in the warmest place. A South Polar skua was found in Greenland 6 months after being hatched and banded on Shortcut Island near Palmer Station on January 20th, 1975. It was recovered by an Eskimo at Godthatsfjorden, Greenland on July 31st. The South Polar skua is believed to range farther south than any other bird and has been sighted at the geographic South Pole. And I wonder if they go in the Earth and far beyond the poles. The two alpacas were brought to Antarctica with the Ron expedition of 1947 and 48. When purchased in Valparaiso, the animals were thought to be llamas and were loaded onto the Beaumont with 1,000 kilograms of hay. On the journey to Stonington Island, some of the huskies broke loose on the ship and killed the alpacas. Poor alpacas. At Punta Arenas, several men of the Rare expedition in 1947 bought a corgi, a whippet, and some sort of sheepdog for pets during their winter in Antarctica. The Adelie penguin is named for Adele, the wife of Jules Sebastien Dumont d'Urville, France's early explorer. Today, French's station, Dumont d'Urville, is situated on the Adelie coast, also named for Adele. The first duck-billed dinosaur found outside of the Americas was located in sands about 66 to 67 million years old on Vega Island off the eastern side of the Antarctic Peninsula. The finding of this hadrosaur gives support to the theory of a land bridge between Antarctica and South America during the Cretaceous period. It is assumed quantities of vegetation existed in Antarctica to support these large plant eaters, some of whom may have stood 20 feet tall. And they say 66 to 67 million, I say several thousand. Why not? Paul Seipel first came to Antarctica as a Boy Scout. He was 19 years old during Bird's 1928 expedition. His skills with dog handling persuaded Bird to allow him to join the winter team. The biggest earthquake in the world in 1998 was the March 25th quake just off the Balleny Islands, which registered an 8.1 on the Richter scale. October 1998 was the coldest and stormiest summer in McMurdo since 1973, breaking a 25-year-old record. Fuel exhaustion forced explorer Lincoln Ellsworth and pilot Herbert Hollick Kenyon to land 25 miles short of Little America on December 5, 1935. The camp had been abandoned by Richard Byrd several years earlier. They walked 6 days to the camp and were rescued by the British Research Society ship Discovery 2 a month later. Their plane, the Northrop 2B Polar Star, was later recovered by Hollick and Kenyon. That's intense. The ice sheet in the South Pole is nearly 2 miles thick and is constantly shifting, carrying the facilities along with it at a rate of about 30 feet per year. I'd like to see some actual, like, 100% proof of that. I've only seen geographical explanations, and some things I assume are that that's not even close. Probably in some areas, maybe, but I don't think that's really the case. I think that's baloney. But who knows? The highest mountains of Antarctica reach over 14,000 feet, about the height of the U.S. Rocky Mountains. And I bet there's something way bigger that they're not telling us about. Captain John Sims contended that the Earth was hollow and open at both poles. Yes. He surmised a 4,000-mile opening at the North Pole and a 6,000-mile opening at the South Pole, with 5 hollow concentric spheres comprising the matter of the Earth. He petitioned Congress in 1823 to send an exploring expedition to test his theory and received 25 affirmative votes. I would have voted for you, Johnny. Lieutenant Charles Wilkes was given the command of the U.S. exploring expedition in 1838 for America's first official expedition to include Antarctica. During his expedition, 62 men were discharged as unsuitable, 42 deserted, and 15 died. Yikes. If completely melted, the present Antarctic ice sheet houses enough water to raise the global sea level by 200 feet. And the last one that they've got on the list is Antarctica is depressed more than half a mile to near sea level under the weight of ice. How they know that, I don't know, but we'll see. We'll see what comes to light, because they're definitely showing something. All those people that go there, all the celebrities that talk about it, all the old presidents, the old astronauts, etc., that get seen there, they're definitely hiding so much. And what is it? I have no idea. But there is something there. Whether it's the ancient civilizations that from the AI, maybe there's something similar to that. Maybe there's nothing even close. Maybe there's a lot more. Maybe there's 2 miles of ice. Maybe there's not 2 miles of ice. I heard recently that they keep discovering that lake, or they keep always telling us about that one lake that's in the middle that's a couple miles under the ice, and they have microbial life. But again, it just seems like them making up things to just give us as smallest bit that they can. Literally microbial bits of information. Yeah, I'm sure there's that. There's probably so much more. And what they've come across on the way down there, what's really over there, what are they really doing with all the land that they hide from us on the map that they still can't take a picture of from space. They'll never be able to take that picture, and until they can, I'm not believing them. And until they take me pictures and allow us to go down here and allow explorers that I trust to go down to Antarctica, I'm not believing anything that I see. But I will explore the potential and just keep talking to you all and seeing what we can find, because someone's got to know. Somewhere it has to be written or something. And someday we're going to take the airships, and we need an army of us. So let's keep that building. A lot of people, airships, boom, we're going. Bless you all. Have a great one.